Good afternoon, all. As I like to always say, is we like to reward those who arrive on time. So we will get started on our presentation. So we'll start with Happy New Year, and I know it's mid-February, but for some of us, it's the first time we've caught up with each other since it all started. So since the year started. So I hope your year's getting off to a reasonable start, and you're not being smashed too hard too early. As I sort of half alluded to, it's today I'm a little bit excited because I actually have our founder, Jonge, joining us to speak on the webinar, and it's nice to have him along rather than sitting on the outside. Welcome, Hank.
Thanks, Ash. It's good to be part of the webinar, not just watching it from the sidelines.
Yeah, checking all the stats afterwards. All right, before we get stuck in today's topics, which is going to be a focus on the outlook for small business for 2023 from our perspective, what are things what you guys can keep an eye on from your clients to some early warning signs, I guess, for what we think could be some problems through the year ahead, and then we'll have a look at a fairly typical case study, which I think you'll find is something that you're going to see a lot more of this year. Before we get into all of that, I just give you a couple of little updates from our side of the world in the insolvency space. I guess it's pretty clear from the press, if you've been watching anything in the press in the last few days, that I think the second wave on the builders is starting to come through now. We're seeing big supply companies as well as the home building companies starting to fall. I think someone said to me before, there's sort of like 3 or 4 have happened this week alone that have hit the press, and I can tell you there's a lot more than that haven't hit the press. So that second wave that we anticipated would come into this year is certainly starting to flow. When you look at some of the other stats that are floating around at the moment, Creditor Watch put out their business confidence type survey just the other day. They showed that business-to-business trade payments defaults have gone up by 39%. So there's been an increase in business defaults in the business-to-business environment by 39%. So that's a big number. Now, whether that's a Christmas period issue, we'll wait to see how the coming months come, but that's certainly a big number. Interestingly, on the other side of that, the accounts receivable seasonally adjusted have actually dropped by 20%. So the average income that each business is getting is dropping quite considerably. The number was actually more like 38%, but if you seasonally adjust it for January, where there's a lot of people are closed, then it came back to about 20%. So that's been on the decline since about July last year. So there are just a couple of the numbers that I think we all need to be aware of, and particularly for our client base, where these things are going to start to cause grief and cash flow pressure at both ends of the scale, both on the revenue and the expense side. The other thing, purely from an insolvency point of view, is that there was a high case decision around preference payments. Now, normally this would be something that you wouldn't really talk about too much because it's not that exciting. But given what we anticipate is going to be a heightened increase in insolvencies, there's more than likely that you will find that there'll be clients of yours will get preference claims against them. Now, if a client gets the reason why I bring this up is there's been a specific change to the offset rule in the way the interpretation by the courts. If you have and we see this quite a lot, where a client might work with a supplier and might raise 100 grand's worth of invoices for them, but that supplier then also works with your client. And let's say as an example, they had 80 grand. At the end of the month, they reconcile both sides of the transaction, and someone pays the net amount, the $20,000, as an offset between the two transactions. So it's not a cash transaction, but it rounds off, and then everyone squares up the bill at the end of the month. I know when I had my accounting practice years ago, you might do a little bit of that for someone who then did some work for you in the garden or on the house or something like that. So that type of offset stuff is quite normal. The problem now is if a company goes into liquidation, it used to be an argument that you could use offset for a preference. So if you had 100,000 and there was a bill for 80,000, you would argue with the liquidator and you'd argue and maybe pay the $20,000. Under this new High Court ruling, you won't be able to claim the $80,000 as an offset. So you'll be on the hook, or the client will be on the hook for the full 100,000. And the fact that you're an unsecured creditor for 80,000 is a completely different event. So the reason why I bring it up is, as I say, I believe that there's going to be quite an increase in insolvencies. I think that's quite expected in the next 12 to 18 months. So we're going to have a lot of clients that are going to get caught potentially with preference claims. If those preference claims come into play and there are offsets, then your client could have a real issue. And in the last week, I've had 2 calls on that exact scenario coming up. So when you're talking with your clients, if they are running offset agreements, it may be worth talking to them about trying to separate that out or be a little bit more careful about it. So just an interesting thing, it's not going to come up all the time, but if you hear about it and you hear about the offset, someone doing an offset, then it might tweak something to have a think about. If you'd like to talk about that more, or if that scenario has popped up, please give me a call outside the webinar, or Hank or any of our team, and we can talk about it with you. So that's my updates. So we'll go back to we'll get involved with our my guest and my founder and the business. So so before we get into the detail of what we think the market's going to do, Hank, there's a number of people who'd be listening today who may not have had the opportunity to either meet with you or have heard you speak before. And although I've talked about where the business started from on the webinar, I thought it'd be good if we start with why don't we talk about how you started the business and why you started it. So why don't we start there, mate?
Thanks, Ash. And that's certainly a topic that's very close to my heart. I guess the firm started 22, well, the reason the firm started, I should say, goes back some 22 years. And I ran a business and was based on the Gold Coast, but the business involved supplying souvenir products for international tourists throughout the country. So it was a reasonably sized firm. I think it was a great business, was doing very, very well. We turned over about 6 or 7 million a year. We did some fairly major expansion in the last couple of years of its operation, and all of a sudden we had 9/11 come along. Now, the effects of 9/11 on international tourism throughout the world were devastating, and certainly we had that effect in Australia, where people just for a number of years just simply chose not to travel due to uncertainty and terrorist attacks and so on. So basically, we had a business that was humming along beautifully, and all of a sudden everything shut down.
And I think even though the events are very different, we've spoken before, the impact on business is very similar to what happened with COVID, wasn't it, really?
Uncanny, Ashley, actually. And I remember when COVID first came about, we did a few webinars and spoke specifically on that. And I guess when I went through it, there weren't things like JobKeeper, for instance, or the Q Rider loans or the other state-based incentives, because when I had my issues, it was specifically targeted at the tourism industry and not the market widely. So we just didn't have that assistance that businesses have had over the last 2.5 years. And for us, when we had the issue, the cash flow crunch was very, very quick, and we were in a situation, like I said earlier, where we turned over about 6 or 7 mil. We had overheads of about 4.5, and they were pretty fixed overheads, not ones that were variable easily. So we were, when our turnover dropped down to about 3, we were in a serious hole. So it was definitely a problem. And back then, the ATO weren't as forgiving as they've been for over the last 2.5 years, which has been pretty amazing. They were certainly their normal self. And the banks, you've got to remember, when we're talking about back when I went through this, that was back in the days when banks were very keen to head down the receivership path, and that was pretty much the standard operation of the banks. So I think, in summary, they were not near as forgiving back then as they have been over the last 2.5 years, mate.
It's so true. The grace the businesses have had in this COVID environment and everything that's been done is just it's almost unbelievable, really, in terms of what we've been getting away with. But we'll talk a little bit later about the cost of that favour that businesses have got, because I think that's really going to have the impact that we're talking about moving forward. So, with all the pressure that you're obviously facing, and without the benefits of the governments being nice and all the rest of it, what did you do next?
Well, first point of call for me was talking with my accountant and lawyer, and I think my accountant is still a firm advocate of or referrer to our firm today, and I think he's attending our seminar today. But I went and spoke to my accountant and lawyer, and basically to ask them, what options I had. And well, like I said, there were 3 things that were important to me: keeping the family home, retaining the car, and trying to save the business, trying to keep my family unit as whole as possible. That was the key for me, the sole key for me. So when I spoke to my accountant and lawyer, they basically said to me, look, that's not our forte. Don't really know the answers, don't really know how you should do that. So they steered me off to go and see an insolvency practitioner, which I did. So I sat down with the insolvency practitioner, asked him exactly the same questions. How do I save that family home? How do I retain the cars? How do I make life as normal for my family as I possibly could? And how do I retain the business? But as the insolvency practitioner explained to me, an insolvency practitioner has a fiduciary duty to get the best result for creditors, not the director, not me. So whilst the insolvency practitioner knew the answers and knew what I could and what I couldn't do, he was not in a position to give me that detailed advice that I needed. So it left me in a bit of a tricky situation.
To stop you there, because I often have conversations with our potential referrers, and they go, well, I've got a really good relationship with an IP, and they'll tell me what I need to do, and if there's stuff I need to do beforehand, then I can get that done. And so if they're saying that and what you went through, has the rules changed? Is that conflict thing not quite as strong as it was back then? Is it a little bit more flexible now, I guess?
Certainly an interesting point that you make, Ashley. As you know, IPs certainly have some great relationships with referrers, and let's face it, some of them are actually really nice people. Yeah. But our service offering is different. Not only do we come up with really good advice and really good strategies, which don't necessarily always require an insolvency practitioner for that matter, but we provide the project management. And having gone through it myself, one of the biggest issues is feeling that fear, being scared, not knowing what to do. So a big part of the Jonge Reed service offering is not only coming up with great strategy, but also holding that client's hand through the implementation process. So not only do the outcomes that we get, in our opinion, substantially better, but we also give them that support during the process. Now, I know that certain IPs can give advice, and they can, you know, that conflict line can sometimes be a little bit blurry. But let's face it, we know from experience, most directors already feel like their life's a little bit blurry. So having that clarity and that direction that Jonge offers, in our opinion, is king.
Right. So, okay, thanks for that. So for you, back then where you didn't have that clarity, and you didn't have that peace of mind that you're talking about, what followed for you?
Well, I felt like I was out of options and I had nowhere to go. So I appointed that IP as liquidator of the company because I didn't have any choice. What happened very, very quickly after was, due to some personal guarantees that I signed, there was a claim made against me personally, and I was made personally bankrupt. So net result of it is we lost the house, we lost the cars, lost the business, and literally had to start again from scratch in my mid to late 30s.
Now, that must have been a really tough period for you and your family, losing all of that in the middle of that.
Oh, unbelievably, the pressure that it put on my marriage, it's the little things that make all the difference. And I remember my son was a keen trail bike rider at 10 or 12 years old, and just not being able to do the repairs on his motorbike and things like that, which were just, you know, unspoken things that just happened. That was the stuff that really cut and really made it very, very difficult. But going through that, so as I picked myself up, and the phone stopped ringing due to the fact that all the pressure was taken away, I started to really analyse it, and I realised that I wasn't the only person going through that type of situation. And when I started to have a look at it, I realised that there were strategies I could have put in place to save the home, to save the business, and potentially the cars. So and coming out of all of that, I guess I decided that other people deserve to have access to that type of service offering that came up with options, rather than just get caught in the insolvency system.
What about, so about 17 years ago, Jonge was born to provide that service.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's probably 18 years ago now. I think we're 17 years for a couple of years now, so it's probably past 18. But that's right. That's what happened, and it certainly started off as a passion project. And I think now, to this day, we're so proud of our team, you and I both. Passion is what we're about. Our staff really, really care, and I think now with offices in 3 states, I think we're getting close to 30 staff, all focused on doing one thing: getting the best result for the director or the business owner. That is the only thing we're interested in for our clients. So it's helping them, giving them focus in situations where they feel helpless, like I did at the time.
So obviously I know the story really well, your story and how it all started, and it's been built on such great foundations, and it's very exciting. And as you say, the passion of our team is second to none when it comes to looking for outcomes for their clients. But it'd be fair to say, well, that I think now our passion's sort of gone to another level, that we really want to reach as many people as we can. So it's not just about helping the ones that turn up, it's about making sure that everybody knows that there are options. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who go into insolvency without knowing all the options that you've got. So I think for us and for me, I think the focus has really been driven more towards a focus on education, and the driving the education to let everybody know that there are 100 options out there. And 100 options might be a bit of an exaggeration, mate, but there are options, and making sure that everyone gets that best advice first.
Yeah, 100%. You're totally correct there. And to help people, we need to find those people that need help. And unfortunately, a lot of company directors and individuals in these type of situations stick their head in the sand and for some reason just hope that it's going to go away. Sadly, directors will also look for advice in the wrong places, and so they don't necessarily get the information that they need. So ensuring that wherever a director goes, those advisors know the options that are available to a client is paramount. So take my case for an example. My accountant was fantastic, my lawyer terrific, but they didn't know what the options were that were truly available for me. So they just couldn't give me that advice.
So nothing wrong with that. It's just people stay in their lanes, don't they?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. So on that front, so we obviously, the webinars everyone's listening in today, they know that they're there. But in terms of the education piece that we provide and what options are available, do you want to let everybody know what else is on the table for them?
Sure. Yeah, it's a very important part for us, and it's certainly a topic that you and I discuss regularly, is how can we get the message out on the options that are available for clients in financial distress. And I guess that's why case studies, do lots and lots of case studies, as you guys probably are aware, where we can show what we can do and what we've been able to achieve. I think seminar series and case studies as part of our seminars has always been a big part, and we are ramping that up again. April, May, I think they're being held, Ash. You have a better idea on that than I would, but seeing as that's your department. But April, May, we've got those kicking off again. Certainly been a challenge though in the current environment, because it's get people working from home and not wanting to socialise or publicly as much. So that was certainly a bit of a challenge. So we're hoping it's pretty much back to normal again this year. We've been doing a lot more in-house training, and I say to everyone in attendance today, if you would like some in-house training within your businesses, we'd love to provide it. It's nothing better than getting your whole team across some of the options that are available for clients. Not only that, but they earn CPD points for attending as well. So please touch base with Ashley, myself, or any of our team if that's of interest. But that in-house training has certainly been worthwhile, and certainly been something that we've been doing. We've been speaking at a lot of conferences and being involved in a lot more conferences over the time. Recently, the National Conference of the Australian Institute of Business Brokers, the Australian Bookkeepers Network. We did quite a successful presentation to quite a number of bookkeepers. Can't remember how many, Ash, but there were lots.
Nearly 200, I think it was.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So it was a very successful event, and also at the state conference of the Tax Institution, Account Tech, and ABE is all part of our agenda. But I think you've actually did the L'Oreal one as well.
That was a bit different to get an invite to speak at L'Oreal as from a pre-insolvency point of view, but we did a conference on asset protection for all the doctors, because they got a bad habit of making good money and then trying to spend it somewhere else that they're not really strong in. So that was an interesting one. But I think it'd be fair to say for everyone listening today, whether it be for your own staff, whether there's networking groups that you're involved in, if there's CPA or IPA groups, where you need a speaker to talk about anything from how to protect a client, how to protect the business, asset protection, we're really keen to talk, and happy to go anywhere, do anything to have a chat and spread the word, because I think we're going to see a lot of pain, and a lot of pain, and certainly keen to let everyone know that there are options, and we don't end up in a position like Hank was 22 years ago where he didn't get that right advice. All right, so Hank, we should probably get on to what we said we were going to talk about today. So I'm going to put you a little bit more under the pump now. So the focus, I guess, on small business in 2023 is what we really wanted to talk about. And I can start with, everywhere you turn at the moment, we're hearing about rising interest rates, inflation, recession, cost of living, house prices going up, down, whichever way they're going. But when you look at that stuff at the macro level, obviously you often ask the question, how does it affect us at the small business end? So I'll give you a very leading and open and ugly question and say, how do you see all of those things impacting on small business?
Yeah, well, I'm certainly not an economist. However, I think the writing's on the wall. It's going to be a very, very tough couple of years for small business. If we break that down a little bit, if we look at interest rates, I don't think rising interest rates is going to have a massive impact. Businesses tend to be paying a little bit more than normal generally, and a rise in interest rates isn't necessarily a killer as far as that goes. In fact, if you think about it, rising interest rates might mean someone's personal mortgage is going to go up, which might put a bit of pressure on the business owner to draw some extra coin out of the business, or maybe by drawing extra money out of the business, doing that via a director's loan, a Division 7A director's loan, which does have some pretty massive impacts for us from an insolvency point of view down the track.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. It's not so much the small business that's impacted, but it's when it does. Interest rates rises do affect the family home a lot more, and that it's that drawing that money out that causes the issue, isn't it? And yeah, as you said, the impact in an insolvent scenario of directors' loans is can be horrendous.
Oh, absolutely. It really can, and it's certainly something that we look at every time we're looking at a new file, is to have a look what's sitting there as a Division 7A loan. And I think it can be a warning sign for our referrers to really monitor and watch, as well as ATO debt as well. But to have a look at growing directors' loan accounts, because that or situations where the directors need to increase their wages to meet personal expenditure and not being in a position to be able to afford to do so. I think all those things start to come into play.
Yeah, that's right. It creates a bigger problem rather than actually turning it into wages at the start. Phil, you're going to leave me with 100 questions at the end of this. Thanks, mate. Unfortunately, in small business, personal and business is often intertwined, aren't they? Really, when we look at this stuff.
Oh yeah, very, very often, and business owners who use their company bank account as their own, which we do see quite a bit, and using that Division 7A is the accountant's only choice of dealing with that when they're bringing the loan accounts up to date. So they need to put some principles in place, really, and that's very very important, because quite often the director's house is tied up in the business somehow, and that's either tied up due to the fact that of borrowings and the bank asking for that as security, or when they're borrowed personally to fund the business, and use it as security. So whether the bank have come along afterwards and just strengthened their position. So quite often that home is tied in. Now, with house prices dropping, I think that's something that we're going to potentially see. This could lead to financiers putting some pressure to reduce their exposure. And I remember going back, what do you reckon, Ashley, 12, 15 years?
12, 15 years, pretty much near the start of the game, really, for us.
Yeah, that's right. We had a situation where property prices were going down, the banks were coming along and wanting to revalue their security and making claims on shortfalls. So, potentially that's something that could be an impact to business and the personal life of a director.
Yeah, I think going back then, what we were seeing is that the covenants would say you needed to have 20, 30, 40% coverage on your security, and then they would freeze overdraft facilities, or they would lines of credit. all those things would just be frozen on a day, and the business would have no time to adjust to it, and then they'd have to go out and borrow at much higher rates to try and keep the business alive. So it was, and to be honest, there's a whole section of the community at the moment who are out there running business that never seen any of that. And it's this probably, as the old boys were, well, I've got lots of grey hair, you've got a little bit, but we remember those things, but there are a lot of people out there who don't have any clue of what that sort of stuff was like. So really, when you look at a small business, it's a very different lens that you have to look through when you look at all these numbers and look at all of the impacts that we're talking about. So what other things can you say are going to impact small business from your point of view?
Well, when you look at the cost of living, supply chain costs, inflation, it's hard to put your finger on the real impacts, but we can see the pressures every day. We can see them now. The building industry is going through an horrendous period due to rising costs of supply. Restaurants are struggling to get staff. There are just so many different areas that lead to cost pressures, which generally will be an impact. Unfortunately, most small businesses struggle to have an understanding of their cost base, and we see that all the time, and therefore they're not sure of their profitability. They're not sure what they need to generate to make a profit, and they're generally focused on cash in the bank rather than is it profitable business? Is it good business? We find that margins are getting really, really tight, and we've looked at a lot of building companies just over the last 6 months or so. And with those rising costs, they're eroding their margins. And we find that businesses tend to be getting job or work for cash flow sake. And it's not necessarily profitable work. It's just work that's generated just to generate cash. And the problem is it can be quite often unprofitable work. So it's actually having an adverse effect, and it's building a bigger hole. Rather than looking at increasing prices and maybe not getting some of the jobs, but the jobs that they're getting being profitable, that's not being the way that they're handling it, which is in my opinion a real issue.
Yeah, I think it create a real vortex of I'll take a job at a loss because I need cash in the bank. And then you need to pay all the bills for that job, which then means you need to find more cash, and it can create a very fast downward spiral, which really causes a lot of grief for businesses, and it happens really fast, doesn't it?
Oh, without a doubt, no, it certainly does, and I guess that leads to probably the next big warning sign. And I know it's been discussed ad nauseum by our industry and during this this webinar, but the tax office. And I think it's really just, if you look back at the last 2.5 years, it's just been bizarre, hasn't it? And I remember you and I discussing 2.5 years ago when the tax office were sitting on their hands. We're going, oh, well, this will be 6 months. And then they'll be back. And then after 6 months, we said, oh, it'll be another 6 months. And then, but to go 2.5 years where the tax office have literally done nothing is been bizarre. But I'm telling you now, and as well as I do, and a lot of the people attending today, that's changed and it is active now. And we know from Jonge's perspective, the amount of inquiry that we've got over the last month is just a massive increase from where we are, and it's solely because of that action. So in the short term, it's certainly happening. We're seeing that the court listings that we have a look at every day have got the ATO listed on them again, and they're chasing.
Yeah, they certainly are. I think the grace period is over, and even though after they're doing the DPN thing last year, which was a strange approach, but Hank, thanks for those insights. And as I said, there are really 100 different things to look at. But one thing I do find is small business are impacted by all these macro numbers very differently. So thank you for those insights. So we are running out of time, but we still have a bit of time to go through a case study that I know that you've been heavily involved in, and one that I think is really prevalent for the time. It's one where when you look at the warning signs that we've talked about with bank covenants, with directors' loans, and when we talk about the ATO, those three warning signs were with this client. It was a group of companies that ran cafes and restaurants. They ended up with about 11 sites and nearly something like 800 staff, I think it was, a lot of them casual, but 800 staff across the group. Business, as I understand it, you were closer to it than I, but as I understand it, the business was doing really well. Lockdowns came into play and the director made the call that he wanted to try and keep as many of his staff on the books as he could. So he kept them employed rather than having to get rid of them all and then try and find a way of bringing them back on. But because he didn't know how long the lockdowns were going to last, he thought that was the better way to do it. Would that be a fair sort of starting point for this one?
Yeah, it certainly is, Ash. That's pretty much the bottom line. I guess the trading over the COVID period, or the lack of trading, I should say, eroded the cash reserves. He ended up doing like we pointed out earlier, using the ATO as the unofficial overdraft. I think we've discussed that many times in this webinar.
Yep.
Across two companies, there were two employment entities. There was a total of $4 million owed to the ATO when we got involved.
So when we got involved, when it was referred to us by one of our great accounting partners, what did everyone want to achieve out of it? Like you're turning up and saying, here, come and see Jonge Reed. What did they want to get out of it?
Yeah, well, we did our normal cost-free obligation meeting, spent a fair bit of time sitting down with the director and the accountant, getting an understanding of what they wanted. And basically, business had returned back to normal. It was trading fine, so the future looked good. But basically, they wanted a way to bring finality to this insurmountable tax debt, no effect to the staff if possible, and try to keep the business going was really that was the brief that we had.
It sounds like a pretty tall order. So what plan did you come up with?
Well, like I said, there were two main entities that we needed to deal with. And to make a long story short, we recommended the use of a deed of company arrangement, a DOCA, so we required both companies to enter into voluntary administration. And we were going to offer the creditors a cents in the dollar return, a cents in the dollar return that would be better than a liquidation. And the main creditor that we had, or the main external creditor, was the ATO.
Right. So I guess to get to that point, though, there'd probably be a million steps involved. There'd be a lot of things to do to get there.
Without a doubt, there certainly is, and it needs to be well planned. And the first step for us was to protect the staff, just in case our strategy wasn't successful. So one of the first steps that we had was we engaged a new employment entity and transferred the staff. The next thing we did was we looked very, very carefully at the voting. Okay, we wanted to have a good understanding as to how that would work. There were a lot of related party loans which had the right to vote, but we had to make sure that the debts were substantiated, okay, and that they actually existed. So when we spoke to the administrator, we could be in a position where we could show that they were correct and firmed up. We also needed to have a look at what the DOCA offer was going to be. We needed to have an idea of what the return would be in a liquidation. So therefore, once we knew what the return would be in a liquidation, we could then determine what would be an acceptable offer to give creditors a better return. We believe it's so important to do as much of this work before you press the button and before that appointment's made. And if we go back to earlier where we're talking about the difference of the service offering of Jonge Reed, this is clearly one of those examples, Ash.
Yeah, so explain that to me. So why is it so important to do that before? because there would be many people here who would have had the advice that you need to appoint a voluntary administrator today.
Yeah. Oh, look, yeah. Once a voluntary administrator is appointed, they take control over the company. And therefore, when determining a plan, certain things may need to be done. And if you're not in control, you simply can't do them. And when I talk about things need to be done, we need to get a firm understanding of how the business operated. Have all these transactions been recorded correctly? Are they in the system the way that they should be, and so on? So, as I know you've discussed before, the next part of it is formulating that offer. We needed to ensure that, like I said earlier, that offer was better than what would be available in a liquidation scenario. Because a part of the administrator's job is to write to creditors and to give them both the liquidation as well as the DOCA returns, and to make a recommendation. So going into that administration, going in there, knowing what needs to be done, knowing what the return is going to be beforehand is just paramount for a successful DOCA.
The amount of times that we've seen, well, I've seen anyway, scenarios where they've gone in straight into VA, and then they thought they were going to be making it 10 cents in the dollar offer, and then they need to make 50 cents to get the recommendation from the administrator. But once you're in there, you can't change it. You know, you can't go back and start again. So it can be pretty tough. Now, you and I could spend an hour talking about all those bits and pieces, because there's so many. You know, I know a little bit about the job, but you and the strategist involved did a phenomenal job in a lot of detail. Not going to let you do that because we've got bugger all time left. So we'll jump straight to how it all ended up, if we can.
I can do that. Right. So I think the magic is in the work that gets done before the outcome. But we went to the vote just before Christmas. We won the vote on the number of creditors. So we had the majority of creditors. However, the main creditor did vote against the offer. So we had one in favour, one against. What that means is it's up to the administrator.
We had multiple, didn't you? You had multiple in favour, one against.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, we had multiple in favour, a number, but we had one against in dollar. So we won on the number, we lost on the dollar. So in those scenarios, it's up to the administrator to use what they call their casting vote. Now, the offer that we put up was a substantially better offer than in liquidation. So we did eventually get the support of the administrator, and we did get the offer through. So we settled for 1.3 million. So it was $4.5 million worth of debt that was settled for 1.3, which, like I said, was a superior result for creditors and a story.
About 25% sounds pretty awesome. It would have been a pretty good Christmas present for the director.
Oh, yeah, it was
and the magic elf over 800 staff who didn't know that there was a problem going on anyway. Yeah. So, well done. And I know that there was certainly a lot of cheers and accolades going around after that one. So we pretty much got to the end of what we wanted to cover, and thank you very much for shortening that up for me. I was going to say people can start writing questions, but I think Phil's already given us a really good start here. So if anyone else has got some questions, I'll quickly run through some of these answers. So if we start with how do you save clients from personal bankruptcy? The one thing I'd say there is that it's not always about saving them from bankruptcy. Going into bankruptcy the right way can actually mean that your life is actually better and goes on stronger. We've talked in the past about the fact that you can go bankrupt and still keep your home. There's tricks and things around, or tricks is the wrong word, but there are processes that we need to go around it. But sometimes it's not about hiding from bankruptcy, it's about using bankruptcy the right way to allow people to move through. Quick answer, yep, happy to talk to NTAA as well, Phil. How do we safeguard small business directors when taking the money out of the company. So, look, this is a tricky one. I mean, if we put aside, if the business can afford it, that's one thing. But when they take it out, it needs to be, they should be on a wage. So they should be getting a wage every week like every other staff member. If that wage needs to increase for the director, then increase it as a wage, don't increase it as a loan. Because the loan, when a loan comes out of the business, if it goes into insolvency, that's a recoverable loan by the liquidator. If it's wages, then it's just standard wages. So that's probably one of the big things to do, as long as the business can afford it. I'll let you talk for a second here, Hank. So I'll ask you this one. So when company directors personally liable, other than giving a personal guarantee, when can they be personally liable apart from that?
Oh, well, a director's penalty notice would be one of the bigger issues. Tax office have been using that as a tool to get company directors to deal with issues and not stick their head in the sand. Yep. Basically, most of you guys would know there's two types: a lockdown and non-lockdown. Basically, in really simple terms, a lockdown one, it comes about when a director has lodged their BAS statements more than 3 months past the due date. As long as they've lodged, within 3 months of the due date, they're pretty safe from what they call a lockdown. The only director's penalty notice that would be a concern to that person would then be the non-lockdown, which is the old one that used to come in the mail, still does. You got 21 days or 28 days from the date of the notice. I'm not sure, Ash, you'd know. 21, there you go. In which to put the company into liquidation, to pay the debt, appoint a small business restructuring practitioner, do one of those things, and you're right. Okay, so you're not personally liable. So they're just a couple of examples.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest one outside of a personal guarantee that we're seeing at the moment. Yeah. The other things, cost accounting, always important, but more than ever, yes. And the ATO, I think, are clearly on the warpath. I think the scary part is the amount of people who have received director penalty notices and done nothing about them last year. Not only now do they have a corporate debt issue, they now have a personal debt issue. So next question, what about companies trading insolvent? Yeah, I'd say, well, look, it's a real issue. If a company's trading insolvent, it should be shutting down or restructuring or doing something that it needs to straight away. The impact on the director, the liquidator does have an ability to chase a director for insolvent trading claims. Very long-winded process. Paul's trying to dig into the fact that you didn't say the name. Was the creditor who voted against the DOCA the ATO?
Yeah,
is your experience that the ATO normally votes against uncommercial DOCA proposals?
Yeah, okay, I'm really happy to answer that one. Yeah, so the creditor was the ATO. We're finding the ATO generally to it's a bit of an unknown quantity. Quite often they're voting in favour. Sometimes they're voting against. There's no rhyme nor reason to it. I think with the small business restructures, the unofficial feedback that I received the other day is if it's 25 to 30 cents in the dollar and a better offer, they'll tend to support it. But it's the person who's looking at the file at the time. This was a commercial DOCA, without a doubt. It was by far a better result. So it was just, this DOCA was to be paid over a period of time. And that was the main hurdle that we had with the ATO, where they were uncomfortable, the fact that it was going to be paid over 36 months. I think if we would have offered it as a cash settlement, then potentially we would have got their support. However, we did have the support of the administrator. The administrator believed even at 36 months, it was a substantially better deal to accept. And because we had the support, we were able to push that through that way.
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, payment plans are always going to be trickier because there's the risk of them falling over and having to starting the process again. Look, we need to start wrapping up. So Hank, I'll let you wrap up for a moment and just give your final thoughts, if you like, for the day. It's been great having you along. It's a lot of fun having you on this side of the fence than the other.
Thanks, Ash. Yeah, no, that's great, mate. And thanks for having me along. In summary, look, keep an eye on ATO portals, tax debt that's increasing without a payment plan. Please see if you can encourage these people to pick up the phone and have a chat with us, or pick up the phone, have a chat with us, and see if you can get us involved. Watch those Division 7A loans. Dockers are going to be something really cool and this small business restructure are going to be really cool for the next couple of years, and we'll certainly be using quite a number of them. So, and that can be any size, you know. So it doesn't need to be as large as the one that we spoke about. As Ashley pointed out in previous seminars, the small business restructures are for debts totaling under $1 million. So certainly they can be done. So there's some great options out there. So please pick up the phone, and don't forget, we do those in-house presentations for your entire team. So if that's of interest, please pick up the phone and give us a call. Thanks, Ash.
Hank. Really appreciate having you come along and being put in the hot seat. So I guess the three big things that I picked up from that is, one, keep an eye on directors' loan accounts. Two, if you've got clients who have got finance, have a look at the finance covenants. And three, ATO. We can't stress that one enough. It's been used way too much as an unofficial overdraft. So something to really be careful of. So we'll wrap up there, and I look forward to seeing you either in person or online over the next month. And keep an eye out for our breakfast and lunch seminars, which will be coming up in April. But I'll be talking to you before those events anyway. So look forward to seeing you all again soon.